what do you make of the president using last night's swearing-in ceremony really as a political event to call out Democrats? I mean, this has been his strategy over the last week and a half. And while I can call for decency and civility all day long, I'm not the president and I'm not running for office. And this tactic that the president used over the last week did change the tide for Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you are going to see, what we saw last night, is what you are going to see for the next 28 days. Listen, the president is trying to keep this anger, this resentment out into the public and say, this is why you need to vote. This is what you need to get excited about this midterm. Republicans have had a very, very hard time in terms of getting voter enthusiasm. This is the one thing where they've seen a little bit of a blip on that. And I think the president is going to try to harness all of that energy for the next 28 days, which is going to be very tough. Listen, it's hard in this news environment to keep it in energy and excitement in one issue for 24 hours, 48 hours, much less 28 days.
Congressman, Brett Kavanaugh said last night he wants to be impartial. He wants to be fair. He holds no resentment or ill will, and he wants to turn the page. Let's assume we take him at his word. Can he do that with the president hanging on to this and name-checking Kavanaugh at every possible rally from here to Timbuktu?
Well, I think that Justice Kavanaugh can do that. He does have a judicial record that demonstrates impartiality and objectivity. At the same point in time, the president's going to say what the president's going to say. I can tell you as a Republican member of Congress, sometimes I don't like what he says, and it gets in the way of things that I would like to talk about. And he's going to continue to do that. So we have to, I think, be mindful of the fact that there are some Republicans that wish he was saying something different. But he's not at times.
But he's not at times. And Eddie, does it work for him? Because while moderate Republicans might be focused on policies and wish that the president would silence himself, that noise he makes at rallies works for his base. And if you combine the two, those who like unemployment at 3.7% or who feel that tough talk on trade in the long term will help, they're willing to support the president, and so will his base. Think about yesterday. I want to share the sound from it. Now that the president is portraying Democrats and protesters as the mob.
If we legitimize this process, the rule of law gave way to the mob rule.
The resistance that has existed since the day after the November 2016 election is centered right here on Capitol Hill. They have encouraged mob rule.
The mob descended on Capitol Hill and tried to intimidate our members.
You don't hand matches to an arsonist, and you don't give power to an angry left-wing mob, and that's what they've become.
And you don't hand matches to someone with a tiki torch, but I didn't see such aggressive talk about the protesters, or excuse me, the rioters we saw in Charlottesville a year ago. But what's your take? How do Democrats handle this? Because in the last week, the president is making hay out of this.
Well, I think the Democrats need to be aggressive in responding to this.
But what does aggressive look like?
I think it looks like an ad that says that the Republican Party is the party of lies. And then just simply a montage of every lie from the state level to the local level, from the local level to the state level to the national level, and just kind of just show how they're lying. Here, you have the Republican Party talking about the rule of law. Where has been the rule of law with regards to the Mueller investigation? Where's the rule of law with regards to emoluments? Where's the rule of law with regards to Trump generally? And then to call them mobs, as if we weren't. Remember the coverage of the Tea Party protest against Obamacare? Did any of the senators get spit on? Were there protesters walking around with AR-15s? Were there posters talking about, McConnell presenting racist images of McConnell or Cornyn or Corker or Trump? So the idea of folk on the left protesting, exercising their democratic rights, somehow being an example of breaking the rule of law, when you have people who were protesting, many people thought they were AstroTurf protests as well, right? Protesting Obamacare, and then to kind of have these very different reactions. What you see here is brazen hypocrisy, Stephanie. And what the Democrats need to do is to call them what they are. They're
hypocrites.
You're
someone who studies this.
Yes.
The average American looking at all of this, do they view all of it as just hyper-partisanship? Or are they able to factually delineate things as Eddie is doing here?
I don't believe there's factual delineation going on between the base of both parties. I will say this. I believe that when Republicans right now are talking about the rule of law, the frustration during the Kavanaugh debate was there was a presumption of guilt. So that's where I think that the rule of law that the president has been speaking about over the past day comes from. And I would also say that showing up at elected officials' houses, death threats, no matter whether you're a Republican or Democrat, is just plain wrong.
Right.
Some of what you said, I think, is very well taken. Some of it, though, I do think is a reflection of the president pushing back on the left's base, which just fuels and energizes the conservative base.
But Congressman, we could all say some of these protesters have taken it too far to these people's homes or restaurants, but the president ignites it. And when you see the president say things like this, or when I look at John Cornyn's tweets making light of Brett Kavanaugh and his drinking days, I wonder, why would our leaders stoop to such a level?
Wouldn't have been my tweet. I wouldn't have tweeted that. I would say, again, and I take issue with sometimes what the president says and does, but a lot of Republicans feel that last week was Democrats on the attack and Republicans had to sit there and didn't say anything. I'm just telling you what the feeling is. I'm telling you what the feeling is.
I know, but women walking the halls of Congress telling their stories about sexual assault is an attack?
No, they should
right?
walk the...
Or I'm sorry, Congressman, or Donald Trump in Chicago urging stop and frisk, which doesn't sound like due process to me, right? The Republicans have engaged in what I call a rhetorical pincer move. On the one hand, you guys revel in the spoils of victory, in the exercise of power, and then as soon as people call you to the carpet, suddenly you clutch your pearls and cry victory.
Okay, but Eddie, whether it's justified or not, is that a winning political strategy?
The Republican base is animated right now. The question is whether it's sustained. I mean, the notion that somehow the left needs to get more energized, I think that we've already gone over the thermometers. But I will say this: going through the halls of Congress and letting folks know that something happened to you, totally agree with that. Screaming and yelling and banging on doors and some of the other stuff that went on was over the top. And I think that the president is using that for political advantage.
The left need not energize. Maybe the left should spend more time strategize. Anna, do you believe the Kavanaugh confirmation energizes one side more than the other? Because it's clear both sides are pretty fired up.
That is very true. I think the one thing to really watch, though, is going to be women. Republicans were already very concerned about particularly white suburban women in a lot of these House districts that are looking not very good for them right now, that the Republicans feel like they could lose the House. And is this going to be an issue? Is the president bringing up Kavanaugh and totally disregarding what a lot of victims and women that have faced sexual assault in their own life feel like they aren't to be believed ever? Is that going to be an animating force on college campuses and among suburban white women? If it is, I think Republicans could be in trouble.
We also learned in the last election, women don't vote in a block. 52% of white women did support President Trump after the Access Hollywood take, after, he behaved as he always does. So are we naive in thinking women aren't going to stand for it? They didn't just not stand for it last time around. A lot of them voted for it.
Yeah, listen, I think all of these, any block, whether any ethnicity, any, regional, you can't look at it exactly like that. We talk about it in those terms because it's a little bit easier to explain things. But clearly, I think what you are seeing right now is Democrats trying to really work very hard to get women in particular there is this movement, the Me Too movement, that is kind of broader than just the East and the West Coast, that it does also impact the middle of the country in some of those states, whether it's Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and try to see if they can use that to fuel and get more Democrats in office.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.